Hello, it's Butterfly, and this is part 3 of talking about boundaries. So in part 1, I talked about the different types of boundaries. Part 2, I talked about an exercise that was given about working with the memory, journaling exercise actually, in working with the memories of parents who were showing some distance or some withdrawn kind of relationship, and therefore it shows that there's an issue of boundaries in that relationship that are unhealthy. So that was part 2. And part 3 is a similar journaling exercise, but it goes through not the rigid boundaries, but more of the enmeshed, sort of unclear, blurred lines that where people are in your business, and there's those triangles that I had talked about before. Now, the examples that that I've journaled about come primarily from this book, and it's the 101 Trauma-Informed Interventions by Linda Curran, Curran. I think I'm going to continue working with this book, perhaps on my channel. If you do like this, certainly let me know in the comments down below so that I know, what it is that you're interested in working with. Now, I guess I should also mention at some point in these videos that I am not a clinician. I have worked as a clinician, but I'm not in a position of counseling, and nor I'm not responsible to a college for counseling at this time either. I do have a degree in psychology, but it is an undergraduate degree, and you don't learn a whole lot of clinical skills. And so that's not where I'm coming from. Where I'm coming from is the space of being the average person who can read a book. That's my claim. I can read a book. You can read a book. And so sometimes when we share information with each other, we can help each other, to grow and to develop psychospiritually. So for me, it's a lot more of a spiritual counseling or a life coaching kind of perspective that I'm coming from. Why? Because I've been doing it on my own for years, and also I like it. I'm good at it for myself, and if this information helps you in any way, then I will be very happy about that. And if it doesn't resonate with you, then you need to find a channel that does. So I'm sharing information that way. So I can read a book. This is the book that I'm reading right now. And I do a lot of journaling, and sometimes by doing the journaling, the written exercises, I find it really helpful. And the exercises that are most helpful are when they're written from people who are very qualified to do that. So Linda Curran has a lot of letters to her name. You can see on the top up here. She definitely has an effective way of kind of bringing you from point A to point B and then beyond. So I advocate for this book because there's a lot of valuable exercises in it. But it's written from the perspective of the clinician. It's written from the perspective of the therapist or the counselor and the person who is working with individuals and with groups. So perhaps I'm reading it in a way that, because I've been kind of doing this work for a number of years with myself, and in some ways professionally with other people in various jobs that I've had. Certainly recently I've been working in daycare since 2006. So in recent years I haven't been doing that kind of clinical work, but prior to that I've had some experience. This is a really, stick to the books if you can't afford an actual counselor who's qualified to work with you. And at least it's a step in the right direction. Okay, so all of that to say, now we're at the next exercise, the next journaling exercise you may want to consider. And it is a time for reflection. So if you're just following on this video, you may want to look at parts 1 and part 2 to be able to understand where we're coming from in terms of talking about boundaries. But in this exercise, the time for reflection, you will consider or meditate on, or write about in your journal, or work through the issues about this question. In what ways was your parent enmeshed with you? Now, in part 2, I did talk about the enmeshment, the triangles that occur, and I gave some examples of that. So I'm going to go on with this. While you're answering that question, you will want to consider the following. So while you're answering the question, in what ways was your parent enmeshed with you? Showing blurred boundaries, unclear. The boundaries are not they were not clearly defined. They think that they can come into your space when that's a boundary that they should not be crossing. And the reason why it's blurred is because it's not been specified. You've not spoken it. You've not, said, don't touch, don't do, treat me, I deserve more respect than that. You need to speak with me with more respect. Those would be ways of clearly defining boundaries. If a child is under the certain age, you cannot do X, Y, Z with them. Whether the child can say for themselves, this is my boundary, don't touch me, don't speak to me that way, don't treat me that way. Even if they don't say it, there is a boundary that is legally imposed. And so crossing that boundary is a disrespect. So those are kind of blurred or ignored, blurred lines. That's what we're talking about. And so when they go into your space, that's called enmeshment. They're enmeshing themselves. So you want to explore sort of the ideas in your memory that include ideas held by the parent that were forced on you. So let's just say, I'll give you an example. Ideas that were held by a parent that were forced on you. So let's say a parent is saying, I can't get past this. I work with a lot of parents in daycare, and one, I won't even say a time frame, but it's not somebody who's currently in my care, but there's a parent who was a father who had all kinds of nasty things to say about the mother because there was a separation, and now this very young child is being brought to me for daycare who was under the age of 2. I don't know if he thought that she was not picking up on that hostility, but they do pick up at all ages. And so that is an example of expecting the child to accept the what the parent says about the other parent, right? It's unfair to put a child of any age in that position where they're listening to the bad things that one parent is saying about the other parent, even if you feel like you're justified, even if you want to, you have all the proof in the world to say that she's a this and that and that and that. Saying that it's not respecting the fact that that is the child's mother. You need to respect that. So, so that is something that I see in my profession, in daycare. And when these kids kind of grow up, then they're expected to hold the ideas that the other parent has. If both parents are being hostile, then oh my goodness, then you have a child who's really kind of having to negotiate between two homes, and one parent is hostile towards the other. You need to kind of align yourself with that parent. And when you go to the other parent, that person is being hostile to the other one. You have to align yourself with that parent. What does that do to a kid, right? At any age. So that would be an example of an idea that was held by the parent that were forced on you. Another idea would be preferences that the parents expected you to share. So if your preference is to stay up all night and to have a band playing in the house and to keep the kids awake all night, those are the preferences of the parent. Or the TV loudly playing until like 11 o'clock at night when the child goes to bed at 9 or 7. Those are preferences that the parents have, or preferences for food that perhaps the child does not care for. And I'm not talking about eat your veggies. I'm talking about preferences, examples of preferences that the parents are imposing on their children that are unfair. And that, and as I'm saying that, what I'm thinking of is you are going to impose your religion, you are going to impose your culture on your children. And we teach that to our children. We don't impose it. We call it teaching to our children. But then at a certain point, usually around the age of 12 or 8 or 15 or whatever, the child starts to develop their own ideas about things. And so the parent has to kind of let go and say, I'm going to respect that you're developing your own personhood. It doesn't just happen all of a sudden one day when you're 18 or 21 or whatever, or 16. The child develops their own interests, their own preferences. And so when a parent is imposing on the child, no, you can't be an artist, you have to go to this sort of college or this sort of a school because that's going to give you jobs. That is a preference that the parent is imposing on the child. It's an expectation that they have to live up to. So that becomes a boundary issue, pulling it back to the boundary issue. So that becomes a boundary issue where then you're in their drawers. You have to start to define for yourself what you will accept and what you will not accept as an okay idea. Typically what kids do is they just end up not saying anything. That's what happens. At a certain age, parents who are constantly saying, this is the expectation, you have to wah, 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 wah. The kids don't hear it anymore. They just stay silent and then they bolt out of the house at a certain age, and then they can express themselves. And then surprise, this is how different I am from you, mom and dad. So that's when you get kind of rebelling. Another idea that you might want to journal about is in considering that question, is the evidence that your parent assumed you felt the same way that they did. Okay, of course you want to go and see this movie with me. I don't even have to ask you for your opinion about what you want to see. We're going. So in what ways did your parent use you to meet their needs, his or her needs? That is something else that you might want to consider. Now that's enmeshment, and sometimes it can be criminal. And you'll see in the examples. So if your parent has a need for power, how do they use you to gain that? Right? My child's with me. I, as a parent, have, whatever they're using to have power because they have a child there with them. Maybe it's for a safety issue. You can't touch me or you can't hurt me verbally because my child is here, or your child is here with me, so you can't hurt me. You're my shield. If you're being used that way as a child, then there's a certain power there that the parent is kind of imposing. There's a power that the parent has by imposing this responsibility on you. That's a boundary issue. In what way did your parent use you to meet their needs for comfort, for sex, in cases of abuse? And that's what I'm talking about with a criminal aspect to it. For stress relief, for a solution to adult problems, like the parent who didn't want to tell mom directly about scheduling issues. That is an adult issue. Scheduling until a certain age, like 16 or 18, scheduling parental time with a child is an adult issue. It is not a child issue. And that it shouldn't be imposed on a child. So that is a solution to an adult problem. Or there may be other ways in which your parent was using you to meet their needs. So this is an additional, that exercise, that second exercise is done. An additional exercise that the author gives, well, there's a few things actually. She says once you've gone through the distancing parent and the enmeshed parent with blurred boundaries, you can go through those two examples again with the other caregiver. If you have two caregivers, or if you give 3 caregivers or 4 caregivers, in 2 households, you might have 4 caregivers, right? 2 that have remarried and 2 that are over here. So there may be a number of times that you want to go through those examples. But this is an additional one that she gives. From what you know about your grandparents on both sides, what is your best guess about their boundaries, about the boundaries of each of the grandparents? So grandmother, grandfather maternal, grandmother, grandfather paternal. You may or may not even know these people. You may have never met them. But if you know them, what kind of influence would they, what were they living from your best guess? Or if you can ask people in the family who would know. And one reason why I think that's tremendously important is they are the parents of your parent. And your parents can only give what they've learned. If they were not, especially in this day and age, your parents may be 20, 40, 60 years older than you, or maybe not 60 years older, but 20 or 30 or 40 years older than you. And they come from a different cohort, a different time where the social lessons were different. We have a lot more awareness available now about how to treat children and how not to treat children. And so what the grandparents would have taught would be very important to know what your parents learned. There's an old adage that says children learn what they live. And so if you learn to live with toxic parenting, you learn to live with addiction in the family, you learn to live with, just maladaptive behaviors, screaming or responding in inappropriate ways or ignoring each other's boundaries. Unless you really distance yourself from that and recognize that there's something wrong, then you are going to adopt the same sort of toxic behaviors that your parents and your grandparents have learned. Your parents learned it from your grandparents, your parents taught it to you, and now it's your job to kind of change it. But you can understand where it kind of comes from because they didn't live in a world where there was a massive information available to them at their fingertips. And there's also kind of intellectual sort of challenges too. I mean, some people just don't get it. They just don't get it. And so they can't live up to any expectations that you may have because they don't and they won't, and there's a lack of accountability because of a number of different reasons. So write about each grandparent. Identify the suspected patterns of enmeshment, the withdrawal, the coldness, the intrusion. Intrusion. Somebody walks into the bathroom when you're clearly there with the door closed. That's rather intrusive. That's a boundary issue. The coldness, not wanting to talk to you just because I've had a bad day, or I'm ticked off at you because of the thing you did. Well, unless you explain to me what you think I did, I don't know what you think I did, let alone what I may have done. And that may not have been my intention. And I would be willing to kind of talk about that, but I don't know what it is. You're just giving me this coldness. That is distance. That is the boundary issue. That is the lack of being able to talk about that sharing safely. And the expectation that your children existed to meet their needs. Okay? So you might want to look at the suspected patterns of enmeshment, withdrawal, coldness, intrusion, and their expectations that children were there to meet their needs. So with children, they're very young, but if you're putting them in a position where they have a job before they even come in the room, that's not fair. Like parents, people, a couple who decide to have a child, and that child is being born with a job. Like, oh, well, once we have a baby, all of these problems will disappear because things will be better. That's a big job for a child who doesn't know anything about anything. It's your job to be the adult and to take care of the child's needs, not for the child to be born with a job and take care of your needs, right? So those are some boundary issues that you may want to explore in your family systems. I hope this has been helpful. And happy journaling. Take some time to explore how you became who you are. And perhaps that can help you to appreciate and understand how other people have become who they are. And yes, let's be kind to each other. Okay. Thanks, and take care.